Ahoy, mateys! Welcome to Podcasts of the Caribbean, a podcast covering the world of Pirates of the Caribbean, from the theme parks to the movies and everything in between. My name is Justin Helmer, and I will be your host on this voyage through the Caribbean. It'd be too late to alter course now, mateys. Hello and welcome back to Podcasts of the Caribbean. This is episode 39, and today we're going to be covering the 7th book in the Young Jack Sparrow series, which is the exciting conclusion of the Sun and Stars Amulet story arc that began in book 5. And this book is titled City of Gold, and it is a really exciting book, so I hope you're all ready for it. And to start, I'll briefly recap the past 2 books, in case you either haven't listened to those episodes, or you just need a quick refresher. So in Book 5, The Age of Bronze, that's when this story arc started, Tumen was accused by his own people of having stolen the Sun and Stars Amulet, which his people have guarded for generations. So Jack and his crew, they find a voodoo doll, and John tells them that Madame Minuit stole the amulet. So the Barnacle sails to New Orleans, where they successfully take the amulet from Madame Minuit, but accidentally turn the entire city of New Orleans to bronze because of the first gem in the amulet. Then, in the 6th book, named Silver, the Barnacle is intercepted by the Fleur de la Morte, which is captained by Arabella's thought-to-be-dead mother, Laura Smith. On her crew is a man named Silverback, who possesses the silver gem of the amulet, and he and Left Foot Lewis try to start a mutiny, but before both of them escape, Jack steals the silver gem and puts it into the amulet. But nothing happens when he does so. But at the end of the book, Laura sails away toward New Orleans with Arabella on board, and it is after this that the rest of the crew realizes that everything that was turned to bronze now turned to silver because of the second gem. So this book picks up where the last one ended, as the crew of the Barnacle sails to New Orleans to save Arabella, stop Left Foot Lewis and Silverback, and find out what Madame Minuit is up to. So let's go right into City of Gold. So the book begins with Jack pacing back and forth in a bayou outside of New Orleans, and he is waiting for someone to show up. And with Jack here is Fitzwilliam, who is hiding in a nearby bush. But Fitzy asks what is taking her so long. And not too long after he says this, Tia Dalma magically appears out of the bayou. And we find out Jack was the one who called her here. So let's go into the book and see what happens. So Jack begins and says, "How do you do that?" Jack demanded. "Why did you call me here?" she asked, somewhat pointedly. "You know I prefer to stay deep in the wetlands." "Well, there's a lot going on in my life," Jack answered airily, waving his hand. "Things I thought you should know about." Tia Dalma opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, Jack had already launched into his story. "See, it's like this," he began. "There's this amulet. It's called the Sun and Stars, savvy? So this Sun and Stars was stolen from the village of a member of my crew named Tumen. Lovely boy. My good crew and I, well, mostly I, but my good crew as well, recovered the amulet. But it does not end there, not at all. In fact, it's just the beginning. We found this little bronze gem thing that we then inserted into this amulet, and after we did that, can you venture to guess what happened? No? Well, I will tell you. Everything the amulet touched turned into bronze. Yes, bronze. I know. I felt the same way about it. Who wants bronze? Apparently someone, and that someone was named Madame Minuit. A beautiful pirate, and like you, Miss Dalma, a practitioner of the mystical arts. Not quite as good, I dare say. Although she does have these creepy snakes that emerge from her arms out of nowhere. You should look into getting yourself some. They might have them on clearance down at the Mystics Market, wherever it is you magic people get your goods. Anyway, we escaped from this New Orleans lady by the skin of our teeth, and not long after we escaped, we bumped into, you will never believe this one, the mother of my first mate, Arabella. Now, why would you never believe this? Well, because the woman was supposed to be dead as a crab cake. Turns out she's not only alive, but she is a pirate, sailing with another fellow we all thought dead, Left Foot Lewis. All this, and we're not even finished yet. There was also this weird chap sailing aboard her ship, Silverback, and the ship itself, the Fleur de la Morte, isn't all that normal. It disappears when the sails are unfurled. How do you find it, you might ask? With a special compass that points to said invisible ship. I have to get me one of those. This man, Silverback, has another gem, a silver one. And when that was put in the amulet, what do you think happened? I know, that's what I thought too, but you're wrong. Everything that had been turned bronze before was now turned into silver. Jack tapped his silver tooth and stared at Tia Dalma. Tia Dalma started to speak again, but Jack cut her off, continuing. As if all that weren't enough, Mommy dearest, Captain Smith of the Floor, absconded with my first mate. Once more, Teodama opened her mouth to speak. "We think they're in New Orleans," Jack Sparrow said, cutting her off again. Teodama sneered at Jack, and he shivered. "Okay, I'm done." "You have come to me because you want to learn the way of the tide. Is that so, Jack Sparrow?" Jack wasn't surprised by her indirectness. "Come again?" he asked. "This is what I hear from you." She waved a finger at him violently. "You want the final gold gem for the amulet, but you also want to be together with your lady Arabella." She said this last piece with a little smile. Then she became stern. "You cannot have both, Jack Sparrow. Choose now." Jack's mind raced. Before he could decide, Teodama shook her head and clicked her tongue. "You delay, Jack Sparrow." She stepped past him and parted the vines, revealing Fitzwilliam. "Perhaps him know the answer," she said in her deep island accent. Jack looked concerned. He should have known Teodama would find Fitzwilliam. You don't get to be a powerful, mysterious practitioner of magic by missing the obvious. Fitzwilliam was staring up at Teodama with an embarrassed smile. "We're here to rescue Miss Arabella Smith," the nobleman managed to spit out. "Getting the final stone for the amulet would be nice too," Jack quickly put in. Teodama sighed, looking at Jack sadly. "I can get you the golden gem, but for the rest you are on your own. You will have to rescue your lady yourself." Jack grinned. "That's hardly a problem there, love. Rescue and recover are my middle names." "You know I demand payment," the mystic said, rolling the words out luxuriously. Yes, of course." Jack began to dig around in his pockets. Surely he had something. Teodama's tastes weren't always expensive. Just weird. Jack added, patting his pockets more desperately. There was nothing. Absolutely nothing. Not even a twig or a broken shell. Things that would be right up Teodama's alley. "You!" Teodama said, suddenly turning to Fitzwilliam and pointing. The nobleman yelped and jumped back, causing the skiff he sat in to tip over and land him in the swamp. "When you retrieve that which is lost to you," she continued, "that thing will be lost again. This time, to me." "I beg your pardon?" Fitzwilliam asked, stuttering a little. "Could you be slightly more specific?" "Oh, shush," Jack said, waving his hands in Fitzwilliam's face. Then he turned to Teodama. Yes, very well, we understand. We're clear to go and all. Will do. Yes, and yes." "Very well, then." She leaned over and tapped Fitzwilliam's neck delicately. When she took her finger away, a deep black tattoo of something that looked very much like a crab remained. "You will be marked until I have my payment," she pronounced. Jack stared at Fitzwilliam, eyes wide. "What is it?" Fitzwilliam demanded, trying to keep calm, but clearly unnerved by Teodama's touch. "Nothing," Jack answered, a little too quickly. The gloom seemed to gather around Teodama. She wasn't moving exactly, but was somehow still disappearing into the marsh, as if the plants and water were slowly sucking her into them. "You will find the last stone for your amulet, the golden one, at the same place where your payment is. I will be looking forward to receiving it," she called to them, laughing as she disappeared. "Fat lot of good that is," Jack said, scowling. "I thought she said she was going to get us the golden gem, not confuse us with stupid riddles and deliver idiotic messages." "What was that woman talking about?" Fitzwilliam demanded, turning on Jack. "About that which was lost to me. And payment. Do you have any idea?" "No," Jack said, shrugging. "No idea at all, mate." He turned the skiff over, hopped in and picked up an oar. Fitzwilliam, dripping with mud, joined him. Fitzwilliam scowled, refusing to speak to Jack as the two rowed off into the bayou. So a lot goes down here. So Teodama tells Jack that the golden gem of the Sun and Stars Amulet is in the same place as her payment, which happens to be something Fitzwilliam once possessed. Her payment is something that was lost to him once, so we'll come to find out what that is very soon. And until Teodama gets her payment, Fitzy will be marked until it's delivered. But Jack and Fitzy are both pretty annoyed at all this, since Teodama didn't really tell them where either the gem or the payment would be. She just said that they would be in the same place. So the two of them then row off into the bayou and make their way toward the now silver city of New Orleans to meet up with the rest of the crew, who happen to be hiding out in an abandoned church. But when they dock, they notice there are no policemen or harbor officials there to greet them or charge them a fee, which is strange since there had been a strong presence at the docks the last time they were here, back in the Age of Bronze. Jack then notices some pirates dressed in all black down the street, which the normal townspeople seem to be afraid of. But Fitzwilliam is not paying attention to this, and Jack notices he is staring into the window of a nearby pawn shop, and Fitzy is looking at something in particular, which happens to be something he had lost before. If you remember back in the third book, The Pirate Chase, Fitzy's pocket watch that had been given to him by his sister was stolen by a thief on Isla Fortuna. And now in the window of this pawn shop sits his pocket watch. So Fitzy demands that they go inside, and at first Jack says no, but then he notices something else in the window, and it is a small golden gem, which happens to be the final gem of the amulet. So just like Tiadama said, the gem and her payment, which seems to be Fitzy's pocket watch, are both in this pawn shop. So Jack then devises a plan to steal the gem by having Fitzy distract the shopkeeper. And Fitzy eventually agrees after Jack persuades him a bit, and he asks the shopkeeper how much the pocket watch is worth. And this allows Jack to pry open the display case and steal the gem, and Fitzy is able to barter for the pocket watch. So both of them get the item they want, and they make their way out of the pawn shop. But they notice a pair of the pirates dressed in black making their way toward them, and this is where we see the first instance of what will become Jack and Fitzwilliam's brilliant and iconic Plan B, which is a very simple plan actually, and involves only one word: run. So Jack and Fitzy begin to run from these pirate guards, and right after they round a corner, they smack into another pair of guards, and Jack specifically slammed into the leader of the guards, and he begins to question both of them. So let's see what happens here. So this begins, and the pirate says, "All right then," the pirate said with a breath that was worse than 5-day-old cod. "Your papers, please." Jack and Fitzwilliam both blinked. They turned to look at each other. "Beg pardon, mate?" Jack asked. "Your papers." The pirate shook his club. "Hand over your papers and we might let you be on your way. None the worse for wear." "I'm sorry," Jack said, "but I'm new in town, and my friend here, well, he's a few fish short of the daily catch, if you take my meaning." Fitzwilliam glared at him, and neither of us is really certain about what papers we're supposed to have. "Don't you play pass the parcel with me, boys," the pirate roared, shoving his face into theirs. Jack almost keeled over from the stench. Something between stale rum and puke. The other pirates were grinning. "You're travelers, ain't ye?" "Well, yes," Jack admitted. "Well, then, you've got to have your traveler's papers." "No one told us about any papers when we disembarked," Fitzwilliam shouted back, unable to stop himself. "What is this? A police state?" Jack groaned and rolled his eyes. It was pretty bloody obvious that was exactly what it was. A bloody police state, with bloody pirates for a bloody police force. "Oh, playing dumb with us, are you?" the big pirate said, smiling nastily. "Yes, it's a game he never seems to quite tire of," Jack said, interrupting. "Of course, we have our traveler's papers. It's just that we're running a little errand in that shop over there, buying stuff. For the girls, you know, trinkets and things. Can't disappoint the ladies, can we?" He gave the pirate police officer a wink. "Anyway, we were probably just left our papers there, so if you'll kindly let us just get them." He turned and casually tried to walk away, but he bumped into a pirate who was suddenly there, a solid, well-muscled pirate. "Nice cannons you got there," Jack said nervously, knocking on the man's huge and black leather-covered biceps. He looked around. The 6 pirates made a tight ring around him and Fitzwilliam. There was no way to escape, and no way they could fight off all of them, even with his newly silver sword. He sighed and held his hands out. "Take us away," he said sadly. The two were marched down the streets of New Orleans with the 6 police behind them. "This is all your fault, Jack," Fitzwilliam hissed at him. "If you had not stolen that gold stone—" "Do you never listen to pirates when they speak?" Jack whispered back. "This has nothing to do with that. Ow!" One of the pirate guards whacked Jack upside the head with his club. "No talking among the prisoners," he growled. They marched the rest of the way silently, Fitzwilliam fuming and Jack resisting the urge to rub his head. He was afraid he would be punished for that, too. They were escorted upriver to a squat, Spanish-style fortification. It was made of such heavy stone that it appeared to be sinking into the marsh. There were bars on the windows and moss growing down its sides. "I'm guessing this is our prison, then?" Jack asked, trying to sound cheerful. "Naw," the chief of the pirate guard said, not so cheerily. "This is just your holding cell. Once they try you and convict you, they'll put you in the real prison, downriver. This is a fairy princess castle compared to that." Jack and Fitzwilliam looked at each other. They were pushed through the door and into the damp blackness beyond. There was a wide room where several pirate guards waited. At the far end was the entrance to a narrow hallway flanked by 2 guards. "Lock 'em away," the chief of police said. The boys were pushed down the narrow hallway, which had a number of cells running along its side. One of the barred doors was swung open and they were thrown in. Fitzwilliam was practically run headfirst into the back wall. "We'll deal with you later," a pirate said. Grinning, he slammed the door shut, twisting the key with a flourish. "Bit dramatic, don't you think?" Jack observed. Sitting in the corner of the cell was an old sailor. He grinned up at Jack and toasted him with a brown glass bottle of something. It stunk like turpentine. "Drunk and disorderly, I'm guessing. How do?" Jack said politely. "Pardon me, I just need to have a chat with my friend here," he added, moving close to Fitzwilliam. "First I am an idiot, and now I am your friend?" the nobleman asked dryly. He waved his hand around the dank cell. "Look where you have landed us this time, Captain Sparrow." "A jail, placed here by pirates. Pirates, not police or the gendarme. Pirates are dressed in black, organized like a police force. Or hadn't you noticed?" Jack leaned in as if he were telling a great secret. "Since when, dear Fitzy, have you known pirates to be organized about anything, or dressed in matching uniforms? They're not exactly known for their team spirit. Something very odd is going on in New Orleans." "Apart from it being turned entirely into silver?" Fitzwilliam asked. But Jack was already not paying attention. The chief of the pirate guards was calling his troops to order. Jack gestured to Fitzwilliam. They should be quiet and listen. "Now, gents, Madame Minuit needs a detachment to help guard the mines." Jack and Fitzwilliam looked at each other. "Madame Minuit? Mines? That witch is in complete control of the city now," Jack asked. "And since when does New Orleans have mines?" Fitzwilliam said. "All right, you two stay and guard the prisoners," the chief announced. "The rest of you lot come with me." The heavy tramping of many boots filed off into the distance. "We've got to get out of here," Jack said. So we learn here, after Jack and Fitzy are thrown in jail, that Madame Minuit is essentially in charge of New Orleans now. And apparently there's also now mines in New Orleans, which had never existed before. So we can easily deduce that these mines must be for the silver the city is now made of. But after this, Jack tries and tries to pick the lock of the cell for over half an hour. And we're going to go back into the book here because there's something you might recognize that's about to happen. So it begins. Fitzwilliam sat with his head in his hands. Even the old sailor cellmate looked disappointed. "No, really, just a moment. A trick I picked up in Singapore," Jack said, trying to sound enthusiastic. Getting frustrated, he jammed the bent piece of metal extra hard into the keyhole. It broke with an amazingly loud snap. Both pieces flew outside the cell in opposite directions. "Oh, bravo, Jack," Fitzwilliam said, clapping his hands. "Well done." "I don't see you with any better ideas," Jack pointed out, frowning at him. "Nice doggy," said the old sailor. Jack and Fitzwilliam turned to look. Outside the cell, down the hall a little way, was indeed a sandy-colored mutt. It looked more like a floor mat than a house pet, though its tail was bushy and its eyes were bright. What caught Jack's attention, though, was the ring of keys dangling from its mouth, one of which looked like it fit the lock of their jail cell. "Nice doggy," Jack repeated, getting down on his knees. Fitzwilliam followed suit. The dog didn't budge. It tilted its head as if it were trying to figure out what Jack was asking for. "Come on," Jack said, losing his patience. He stuck his hand through the bars and tried to gesture to the dog to come closer. "Come on, you mangy mutt." The dog cocked his head at him. Jack looked around the cell for something to entice the dog with, but there were no bones, not even a stick lying around. Nothing. Then an idea came to him. Before Fitzwilliam could protest, Jack whipped the nobleman's beloved pocket watch out of its fob and dangled it outside the cell. "Give that back to me now, Sparrow," Fitzwilliam demanded. "Shh," Jack said, not even turning back to look at his angry friend. "Here, doggy, look at this, eh? This is a nice toy, this is. All gold and sparkly." He bounced it and swung it enticingly. The dog's eyes followed its every move. Jack took the watch and threw it out at him, holding the end of the chain and snapping it back at the last minute like a yo-yo. "That is fine Dutch craftsmanship, not to mention great sentimental value you are toying with," Fitzwilliam raged. The dog came forward a step, lifting a paw. "Here we go. Nice doggy." Jack flipped the watch out again. This time the dog couldn't resist. He pounced. Jack snapped the watch back into its right hand. With his left, he reached out and grabbed the keys. The dog barked. "Shut it up, Jack," Fitzwilliam said, panicked, but not too panicked to grab his precious watch back. "Do I have to do everything around here?" Jack demanded. "Arf, arf," the old man in the corner coughed obligingly. "Ah, shut your trap, you old drunk," a pirate guard called out. "Thank you," Jack said, pressing his hands together and giving a little bow. "At least someone else is pulling his weight around here." Then he pushed his hands through the bars and set about unlocking their cell with the key. The latch clicked and the door swung open. "Ah, the heady stench of freedom," Jack said, taking a sniff of the close, foul air. He and Fitzwilliam stepped out. "You coming?" he asked the old sailor. "Nice doggy," he answered instead, patting the ground. The dog came bounding in, wagging its tail and panting. It sat next to the old man, who began to pet it. "Huh," Jack said, narrowing his eyes. Then he lifted one foot dramatically to indicate their exit. So in that passage, we get a cool little dog with the keys moment here, which is very fun. Of course, this is a reference to the original Pirates of the Caribbean ride in the Disney parks. But also, I guess this is technically where Jack learns this from, as he also does this in The Curse of the Black Pearl to try and get out of jail before Kohler and Twig show up. But anyway, now that Jack and Fitzy are free, they make their way through New Orleans to the abandoned church the rest of the crew is waiting in. And once they get inside, they see Tumen, John, Tim, and Constance waiting for them. And John immediately notices the crab mark on Fitzy's neck from Tia Dalma, and Jack shows them the golden gem he was able to find. Tumen is dismayed once he sees this, though, since he thought Jack was no longer interested in magical things, and also for the fact that his people had warned others not to use the full power of the amulet. And he tells Jack not to put the golden gem into the amulet, and to remember what his great-grandfather Mam said about it, that it is dangerous. Fitzwilliam, however, changes the subject and asks if the three of them had any luck finding Arabella or her mother. They tell them that they haven't seen either of them, but they did hear about Silverback and Leftfoot Lewis being seen with the higher-ups of the Pirate Guard. But Tim shushes everyone as he hears boots outside, and Jack believes it to be the police, and very quickly, all of them try to escape out of the church. Tumen stamps out their fire, and Jack is able to open up a back window, and they all escape into the back of the churchyard. But unfortunately, a tall fence blocks their way, and Jack tells them all to climb up into the trees to hide. And right as everyone does so, the pirate guards show up looking around for them. And so far, they have no idea they're in the trees. But Fitzy needs to sneeze, and despite him trying to hold it in, he sneezes super loud and alerts the pirate guards. And the leader then looks up into the tree and sees something, but right before one of them is about to climb up, Constance leaps out and hisses at the guard before throwing up a hairball, and this is enough to make the guards give up and leave. So the leader then tells the guards he needs to report in to Madame Minuit as they are walking away, and after they are gone, the crew jumps out of the trees, and Jack tells them they need to follow the chief since he is going to where Madame Minuit is located. John then asks why, and Jack explains it to them, and I'm just going to read his long-winded response here. So John asks, "But why? How will that help us?" "Because," Jack said patiently, "he is going to report to Madame Minuit. Besides all the various revenges some of us would like to take on Madame Minuit," Tim nodded vigorously at this, "she will also lead us to Silverback and Leftfoot Lewis, and as we know, that's where Arabella's fierce mommy is headed." The three other boys stood there blinking, not understanding the connection. Even Constance seemed confused. Jack sighed. "How else would the madam have known to go after our Tim Hawk here? Silverback somehow knew his family had the silver bullet, and though they might have some clue about the location of the amulet itself. And unless the entire Caribbean also somehow knows this, it would be an extremely strange coincidence indeed for both him and Madame Minuit to be interested in the amulet and our Tim Hawk, don't you think? Not to mention the fact that you've already said Silverback and Leftfoot Lewis were seen with the Pirate Guard muckery mucks. And when we find them, chasing Silverback and her old friend Leftfoot will be the irate Captain Laura Smith, wanting her revenge on the mutineers. And with Captain Smith will be her daughter and our first mate Arabella. So in order to find and rescue our friend Arabella, if you haven't been paying attention, we have to follow this police chief to Madame Minuit. Jack looked each one of them in the eye. Savvy? So with that, Jack and the rest of the crew begin to follow the chief of the pirate guards. And it begins to rain as they're making their way through the streets of New Orleans. And they eventually reach a fork in the road. And because of the rain, they aren't sure which path the chief went down. So Jack proposes to split up. So John, Tumen, and Tim will take the left path, and Jack and Fitzy will take the right path. So the crew splits up, and almost immediately Jack and Fitzy notice 4 pirate guards ahead of them who are changing shifts. And Fitzy asks Jack how they will get past them, but Jack says he has an idea. But before we find out what Jack's grand idea is, we shift over to John, Tumen, and Tim, who are making their way down the left path. So the three of them run into a pair of pirate guards, and they immediately question the boys if they have their papers. And in response to this, John starts speaking in French, and the pirate guards have no idea what they're saying. So the guards then turn to Tumen, and they ask him what John said. But Tumen replies in Mayan, so the guards are even more confused. So the two guards then turn to Tim, and they ask him where their papers are. And Tim responds in some weird made-up language, which confuses the guards even more. So the two guards just end up giving up, but they quickly said that they just passed the chief of the guards. So they walk away, and Tim decides to run back and find Jack and Fitzwilliam. So now we go back over to Jack and Fitzy, who are executing Jack's grand idea. And we're going to go back into the book and see what this idea is. Meanwhile, down the other road, two oddly familiar and kind of ugly ladies minced their way along, swathed from head to foot in soaking wet pastel rain cloaks that looked suspiciously like sheets. "This is never going to work, Jack," the one in pink said dejectedly. "Just follow my lead, Fitzy," the other replied, pulling an improvised chartreuse hood down lower. There were now just two pirate guards at the street corner. Jack and Fitzwilliam tiptoed up to them, swaying their hips. Jack let out a high-pitched squeal of laughter. "Good evening, boys," Jack said, batting his eyelashes at the guards. "Evening, ma'am," a guard replied, tipping his hat. "Awful night for a lass like you to be out, eh?" another guard said admiringly. A little bit too admiringly. "We're just on our way to a knitting circle," Jack said, keeping his voice high and trying to step away. "You know the sort, where you crochet and afghane, and well, you know how it is. Can't be late." "Oh, I'll just stay a few minutes," the policeman said. "Our shift gets so lonely." He waggled his eyebrows and made kissy lips. The situation was getting out of hand. Jack had no idea what to do. Fortunately, Tim ran up just at that moment. He stopped, struck dumb at the weird scene before him. "Oh, there you are, my boy," Jack said, immediately seeing an escape. "Naughty thing, running away from a mama like that." Bad me," Tim said, his wide eyes shocked, more than a little freaked out. "Come on then, lad, let's get you back home. There is a curfew, you know. Good night, officers. Keep up the good work," Jack said in his high-pitched voice, waving his hand in the air delicately. "Thank you, Timothy," Jack said in his regular voice. "You've just saved me from the terrible fate of becoming Mrs. Big Ugly Police Guard." "No worries," Tim said, still sizing Jack and Fitz up, even as they removed their makeshift ladies' clothing. What had he gotten himself into with this crew? "Of all the humiliating," Fitzwilliam shouted, pulling off and throwing aside the bright sheet he had been wearing. "Actually, I thought you looked rather fetching," Jack said with a wink and a grin. Tim filled the two boys in on the chief's whereabouts, and once they were reunited with John and Tumen, the five hurried to catch up to the police chief. He led them straight to a huge town hall. More pirate guards. There was no way the crew could march right in. "Around back," Jack suggested. The rear of the building was definitely more promising. Although the door was locked, just under the roof was one window with its shutters open. Someone had forgotten to close it against the rain. Leading up to it, almost like a ladder, was a thick growth of ivy on a trellis. In the blink of a mangy cat's eye, the five boys were scuttling up it. Once inside the building, they found themselves in a small room of a long hall. At the far end was a narrow staircase. Sneaking down one flight, they came out on a balcony that looked over the main ceremonial hall. But it wasn't a ceremony that was taking place in that hall. Instead, it was where Madame Minuit had decided to set up shop. She was wearing her stunning black and red dress and beautiful beaded hairnet. She sat in a fancy carved chair that seemed to be serving as a throne, flanked by half a dozen pirate guards. Before her was the chief of police, reporting in. "Mining is going quite well, madam," he grinned, embarrassed. She smiled benignly. Madam was definitely pleased with his report. Obviously, Jack thought, if she weren't pleased, she would have had her pet snakes attack the man by now. "Excellent," she said, smiling. "In only a few months, the entire city shall be mined and shipped to Europe and the colonies. Good riddance." Jack and his friends all looked at each other. New Orleans itself was the mine. "Madame Minuit, your next appointment is here," an attendant said softly, clicking his heels. "Send them in," she responded carelessly, waving her hands like a queen. Jack rolled his eyes and imitated her, waving his own hand. Then, Left Foot Lewis and Silverback entered the room, grinning like two very self-satisfied cats. "It seems to be a summit of the vilest pirates in the Caribbean," Fitzwilliam said in a whisper. It looked bad, Jack had to agree. It was the 5 of them against the Snake Queen, the incredibly burly and scary police chief, the crystal-legged pirate wizard Silverback, and his friend Leftfoot, who was basically a several hundred-pound berserker. The odds weren't good at all. Jack leaned over the rail, scoping out the entire room and trying to come up with an alternate plan for getting rid of all the baddies at once. The balustrade creaked loudly under his weight. Fitzwilliam and the others looked at him in horror. Part of the old wooden railing then broke off and landed right at Madame Minuit's feet. Jack smiled weakly and waved. So now, Madame Minuit, along with Leftfoot Lewis and Silverback, know Jack and his crew are here. So Jack employs the now perfected Plan B, which of course is to run. But when they try to escape through the window they came in from, they notice it was blown shut by the wind. So Jack then proposes to stand and fight as they have no other option, and the crew reluctantly agrees as well. Jack and the crew then burst into the Great Hall, where all 3 villains are still waiting for them. So let's go back into the book and see how this fight plays out. Everyone looked surprised when Jack and his friends burst through the double doors of the Great Hall. "Come to meet your fate, we," Madame Minuit said, grinning with sparkling white teeth. "So be it. Attack!" Leftfoot Lewis, with a knife in each hand, made immediately for John and Tumen. He wasn't skilled the way Fitzwilliam was in two-handed fighting, but he was big, and fast, and strong, and joined by 2 other pirate guards. Tumen took the left side of him, John the right. Constance paced this way and that, hissing and spitting as though she was very much wanted to join the fight. "En garde!" John shouted. Meanwhile, Madame Minuit curled her hands like claws. Lightning flashed outside. Her snakes began to appear, crawling down her arms from her back and neck. "You escaped me once. You'll not escape me again," she hissed at Tim. "I think we have a little disagreement on that point, ma'am," the boy taunted. He threw his knife. It whistled through the air and buried itself right between the eyes of one of the snakes. Madame screeched and the serpent fell to the ground with a thump. Another knife appeared in his hand, ready to throw. It was a little trick he had picked up in the dockyards of London and could now put to good use. Madame Minuit pulled out a dagger of her own. Tim smiled. He had been waiting for this fight for some time now. Meanwhile, Jack and Fitzwilliam found themselves engaged in a battle with a furious pirate guard police chief and 4 of his subordinates. Each had multiple weapons. Jack looked around worriedly. His crew was fighting incredibly well, with new moves and skills they had picked up while adventuring with him, but they were still outnumbered and outweaponed. At least Jack's silver cutlass was holding up pretty well, but this was probably the one time in his life he would have preferred to steel to precious metal. The steel would have been stronger. Silverback was the only pirate not actively engaging anyone. He just stood in the rear, looking back and forth at each one of the fights as if trying to decide which one to join. His tooth and crystal leg were glowing faintly. Before he could make a move, however, the door burst open. In rushed Captain Laura Smith with her first mate, Mr. Reese, and Arabella. All had their swords drawn. "Silverback!" Captain Smith roared. "You villainous traitor!" She charged at him, sword out and swinging. Jack looked around, stunned. It was as if every pirate in the Caribbean were in the room. Mr. Reese engaged the pirate guard closest to him. Arabella picked another one at random and whacked him with the butt of his own musket. Jack smiled. There was a pirate right behind him, ready to attack. The man came charging at Jack, who moved swiftly and casually out of the way, leaving the coast clear for the pirate to slam right into the adjoining wall. Now, at least, the battle was almost even. But not easy. Fitzwilliam had broken out into a sweat while fending off pirate guards. John had a gash on his right cheek and was slashing desperately at Leftfoot, but the giant pirate just kept coming and raining blows down on him. One of Madame Minuit's snakes was on the floor, not quite dead yet, and it still hissed and lunged at Tim's feet. Tim knew that if this snake bit him, its venom would make him a slave to Madame. Arabella had to drop her musket. No time to load it. One of the pirate guards was running at her. "Jack!" she shouted, looking for help. "Good to see you," Jack said, waving and smiling. "Help!" Jack pulled out a cutlass and blocked the guard's blow just in the nick of time. Arabella ran to Jack and threw her arms around him. "What say we all manage a little strategic retreat?" Jack suggested. "We might actually live through this." "Normally, I would say fie on cowardice," Fitzwilliam said, parrying another blow from a pirate guard. "But we have Arabella back, and we have the amulet, so perhaps retreating would not equal a loss in this situation." Arabella smiled. "Crew!" Jack called out. "Proceed to the nearest exit." "Retreat!" Captain Smith bellowed, enraged. "Never!" "He meant crew of the Barnacle, mother," Arabella snapped. "Do you ever listen?" Arabella kicked a nearby opponent in the shin a little harder than she needed to. still angry at her mum. The pirate toppled like a bag of apples, rubbing his leg to ease the pain. "This battle isn't going as well as I should like either," Madame Minuit whispered to her police chief. "Perhaps we too should withdraw." Slowly, one by one, John, Tumen, Tim, Arabella, and Constance exited the building, retreating in the opposite direction were their opponents, pirate guards, Leftfoot Lewis, and Silverback. Frustrated, Captain Smith stayed, looking for someone else to fight. Only Madame Minuit was left. Jack was protecting his crew's retreat by blocking Madame from the door, keeping her and her snakes at a sword's length away. "Who is this hussy?" Captain Smith demanded. "Is this the practitioner of magics my belle was telling me about?" "I am no hussy," Madame Minuit spat. "Ooh, fight," Jack said encouragingly. But while Jack was distracted, one of Madame Minuit's snakes lashed out towards him, fangs glittering. Jack yelped and leaped back. Too late. But instead of biting him, it hooked its fangs around the chain of the amulet and pulled it from his neck. Before Jack could do anything, another snake began to cough, vomiting up a perfectly round egg into Madame Minuit's hand. She cackled evilly, smashing it to the ground. A cloud of foul-smelling smoke rose up, and she disappeared into it, taking the amulet with her. So now Madame Minuit has the amulet once again, but everyone, thankfully, has escaped with their lives. And the crew of the Barnacle is reunited with Arabella once again, so they exchange hugs and all that before Mr. Reese says they should head to the Fleur de la Mort, as that would be the safest place for them currently. And to get to the Fleur de la Mort, Laura Smith uses her magical compass that points to wherever the ship is, and Jack gets very envious of this, of course. But as they are making their way toward the ship, they see something happening in the streets of New Orleans, and what they see is the mines that were referenced earlier. And as we know now, the mines in question are actually mining the city itself, since it is made out of silver. And Madame Minuit, of course, plans to sell all this silver over in Europe. And the miners seem to be normal New Orleans citizens who are chained at the legs and being supervised by pirate guards. But after they pass this, everyone makes it onto the Fleur de la Mort, which is currently invisible because of its sails being unfurled. Tumen then asks Jack to return the amulet, and this is when Jack finally tells the crew that he no longer has it and that Madame Minuit just stole it from him. Tumen is very, very angry at this, as all he just wants to do now is to bring the amulet back to his people so he can return home. But Laura then tells them she has a plan, and her plan is to go up to Madame Minuit and act like she is double-crossing everyone, along with asking for a cut of the profit. Jack likes this plan, but Laura also adds in that she will need to take Jack in as her prisoner, so Madame Minuit will hopefully be fooled by the scheme. So not long after, Laura, Jack, Mr. Reese, and Arabella are making their way to the city hall, and Jack has his hands bound together to make it look convincing. And once they head inside, Laura calls out for Madame Minuit to show herself. So let's see how this goes down. So after Laura calls out to Madame Minuit, it says in the book, "A horrifyingly gigantic snake came out of the gloom, making its way slowly and deliberately towards them. It was green and black with shiny plate-like scales, huge white fangs, and slitted eyes." Captain Smith stood her ground, trying not to look nervous. Arabella and Mr. Reese didn't do quite as well. Jack just sighed. As he had expected, there was a flash of light and a puff of smoke. Suddenly, in place of the snake stood Madame Minuit in her pretty form. "So bloody dramatic," Jack muttered. Mr. Reese kicked him in the shin. Captain Smith didn't even blink. "Madame Minuit, I presume," Captain Smith said with a curt little bow. "Yes, the witch you referred to before," the Snake Queen said languidly in her thick French accent. "Why are you back here, Lady Pirate? You were as good as dead for attacking my compatriots." "I was not fully aware of the details of the situation at the time," Captain Smith said, trying to sound contrite. "My only thoughts were for revenge on Leftfoot Lewis and Silverback. They plotted a mutiny against me. Forgive my earlier indiscretion. I have returned with a business opportunity that will benefit us both." "I see. Go on." It was obvious from the tone of her voice that Madame Minuit didn't think Captain Smith had anything to offer her. In fact, from the look on her face, it was clear she didn't care for the captain of the floor at all. "I am a well-known smuggler on the Seven Seas. I have liaisons and connections everywhere from the Orient to the Outer Hebrides. I can help you move your silver anywhere in the world. All I ask is a share of the profits, and that Leftfoot and Silverback be handed over to me." Madame Minuit just stared at her with unblinking eyes like a snake. She didn't say a word. "Here, I've even brought you a gift of my goodwill," Captain Smith continued. Mr. Reese pushed Jack forward. "Captain Jack Sparrow, biggest troublemaker on the 7 seas. I know he's been a thorn in your side." Madame Minuit laughed softly. "Merci, thank you. It is a lovely gesture. But why on earth would I need a partner when I can have all the gold for myself? Because I—" "What?" Captain Smith stopped, suddenly realizing what the madam had said. "Gold?" "Gold," Jack echoed. Mr. Reese, also confused, didn't bother to shut him up this time. Quick as lightning, a serpent shot out from Madame Minuit's wrist. It lunged not at the captain, but at Jack. More specifically, Jack's pocket, the one where he kept the gold gem. Before he could react, it sprung back out of his pocket, the shiny orb in its mouth. It dropped to the floor and slithered back over to Madame Minuit. "What is the meaning of this?" Captain Smith demanded. But Madame Minuit ignored the captain. She pulled the Sun and Stars Amulet out of her dress and triumphantly placed the gold gem into the final socket. This was not going according to plan. "No!" Arabella cried. Thinking faster than anyone else, she cut the one loose rope which was tying Jack's wrist together. He was a little distracted. His tooth, the silver one, was tingling unpleasantly, like he had just bitten into something very cold or sweet. But he pulled himself together and leapt at Madame Minuit. He brought his fist down on the amulet, knocking it out of her hand. It smashed to the floor, the bronze, silver, and gold gems popping out and rolling across the floor. Madame Minuit let out a screech. "Jack, look!" Arabella said, pointing to the floor. Color was creeping back into the world. Everything that was silver was returning to its original state. The floorboards slowly became brown and softer looking, and brown shine licked up the banister like a flame. Out the window, it looked as though a can of paint had been poured over the entire city, filling it with color and texture. Greens and blacks and blues and yellows broke forth as leaves and grass and stones and lamps all transformed into their normal states. Arabella grabbed Jack's face and turned it towards her. For a very scary moment, he thought she was going to kiss him. But she was only looking at his tooth. "Your tooth! It's gold," she said, a little surprised. "I suppose it was turned to gold before the gems fell out of the amulet, and stayed that way. And my sword!" Jack cried happily, pulling his rusty, then bronze, then silver cutlass out. But only the tip was gold. The rest was back to being its rusty old cruddy self. Jack almost threw it down at the ground in disgust. Madame Minuit had stopped shrieking in rage. Her sudden silence was alarming. She was green with anger, the whites of her eyes going red. Her hands were clawed, and her back was arched. Even the normally unflappable Captain Smith looked a little daunted. She moved closer to Arabella, standing between her and the Snake Queen. "Miss Fields," Madame Minuit growled. "Come!" The inner doors flew open, and Leftfoot, Lewis, and Silverback came rushing in, swords drawn. "Here we go again," Jack said, reaching for his sword. But before the two pirates could do anything, Madame Minuit attacked them. Jack's jaw dropped in surprise as snakes launched from her fingertips and flew through the air. They landed on Silverback's and Leftfoot's necks and bit down, the snakes' bodies writhing as the poison pumped through their fangs. The two pirates were instantly frozen, horror and amazement on their faces. They swayed a little, trying to break free, but they were paralyzed. Madame Minuit quickly stepped between the two pirates, taking their hands in her own. Madame Minuit hissed in some horrible ancient language. Her eyes rolled until only the whites showed, and then they turned scarlet, dripping blood. "Ah," Jack said, "maybe we should—" Silverback's crystal leg began to pulse in 1,000 different colors. Tiny lights and shadows were thrown all over the room in a hypnotizing display. Suddenly, Madame Minuit threw back her head and let out a howl. It was an unearthly, horrible sound. Everyone except for Leftfoot, Lewis, and Silverback, who were unable, clapped their hands over their ears. The outlines of Madame Minuit and the two pirates began to blur. Their skin grew soft, and it flowed in a sickly fashion. Their bodies melted and merged, falling to the floor in one pulsing, fleshy lump. Mr. Reese looked away, sick. There was a blinding flash of green light. Jack blinked. When he could see again, he wished he couldn't. The thing rose up from the ground, now complete in its transformation. Madame Minuit, Silverback, and Left-Foot Lewis were gone. In their place was a giant serpent with 3 heads. It threw its heads back and screamed. "Get out of here, Belle," Jack ordered, drawing his sword and facing the dragon. "Not on your life, Captain Sparrow," Arabella cried indignantly. "When have you ever known me to desert, eh?" "Belle, I mean it," Jack said firmly. Arabella stood for a moment, stunned by Jack's sincerity. Finally, Arabella nodded and saluted Jack. "I'll take care of the ship until you return, Captain," she promised. "If I return," Jack said with a grim smile. "You too, Laura," Mr. Reese said, standing between her and the dragon. "What are you talking about?" Captain Smith demanded. "And calling me by my first name. You chauvinistic—" "Please, for me," Mr. Reese said bravely. "I failed you during the mutiny. Let me make it up to you. I couldn't live with myself otherwise." Laura hesitated. So did her daughter. "Go!" Jack and Reese shouted at the same time. So they did. "Well, that's that then," Jack said bravely, turning to face the dragon. He and Mr. Reese exchanged a grin. As my friend John would say, "On guard." Okay, so before we continue, I want to point out that Jack's tooth has turned to gold, and even after the amulet lost its gems, it stayed gold. So now we have the origin for one of Jack's gold teeth, which I think is really cool and a neat way to add like a story behind something so like insignificant as that, which is really, really, really cool. But like I said, the amulet is now powerless without the gems, and in her anger, Madame Minuit unleashed her power and turned herself, Left-Foot Lewis, and Silverback into a giant 3-headed serpent. And even the description of the transformation is really disgusting. And the first time I read it, I was so taken aback. I'm like, what is happening right now? But anyway, now it's just Jack and Mr. Reese against the serpent. So let's see what happens next. So chapter 9 begins and says, "The beast hissed and drooled. The head that was once Left-Foot's was now only vaguely recognizable, distorted with scales and large pitted nostrils. It lunged back and forth on its disgustingly skinny neck, as if deciding where to attack first. Finally, it lashed out at Mr. Reese. The floor's first mate brought up his rapier smartly and parried. Metal clanged onto the giant yellow fangs, throwing sparks into the air. But while he was distracted by Left-Foot, he missed Silverback's attack. The sneaky pirate's head slithered along the ground on its own snake-like neck. It bit down hard on his leg. Oh no, you can't be serious," Jack groaned, when Mr. Reese went down with a cry. Gleaming drops of venom oozed out of twin nasty bloody wounds. "Why is it always me?" the captain of the Barnacle continued to grumble, placing himself in between the serpent and his fallen companion. The Madame Minuit snakehead hissed and pulled back, preparing to attack. Jack stood without moving as the giant open mouth screamed down at him. At the very last second, he jumped out of the way. At the same time, and without looking, he brought his sword down behind him, where the Silverback snakehead was once again trying to sneak in and bite while Jack was distracted. His sword hadn't cut very deeply. The soft gold tip of Jack's cutlass bent and skittered across the hard, scaly plates, only gouging the flesh a little, but enough to hurt. The snakehead roared with anger and pain. "Throw me your sword," Jack called out to Reese. Trying not to moan with pain, Mr. Reese valiantly tossed Jack his shiny steel rapier. Jack caught it and spun, just in time to fend off another attack from the Left-Foot Lewis snakehead. Bringing the rapier out swiftly across his chest, Jack managed to sink the blade deep into the thing's neck. Recovering quickly, the beast's Silverback snakehead once again slithered along the floor, aiming for Mr. Reese. "Watch it, mate!" Jack cried, but the first mate of the Fleur de la Mort was barely conscious. He had one hand on his wound, trying to staunch the bleeding, and one hand with a dagger in it, which probably wouldn't have done much good. Jack ran and leaped. He grabbed the chandelier and swung from it. With one swipe of his sword, he cut the lamp's chain, then ran clear as the chandelier fell with a crash to the floor, and onto the Silverback snakehead's neck, preventing its open mouth from biting Mr. Reese. The beast was now even more enraged. Sparks glittered around its evil golden eyes. Lightning fast, it snapped at Jack. Instead of trying to bite him, as Jack had expected, the beast whipped one of its long necks around his back and legs and pulled, crashing him to the ground. A beast slithered out from under the fallen chandelier. The main snakehead, the one formerly belonging to Madame Minuit, paused as Jack hesitated. Its gaze was terrifying. Jack heard a voice but could not tell if it was coming from the snakehead, his own mind, or somewhere else entirely. "Jack Sparrow," the voice whispered. "Everywhere you go, you bring chaos and trouble. Violence and curses follow you like twin dogs, and your friends often have to bear the brunt of it. You turned this city silver, all because of the amulet, which you promised your little friend you would return to him. You didn't need to go looking for the gold gem, did you? Oh, but you were curious. The power drew you in." Jack paused. Was that right? Was he totally blinded by the lure of the Sun and Stars Amulet and the freedom it would provide him? He really didn't need to find the gold gem. Or the silver one, for that matter. They were just supposed to find the amulet and bring it back to Tumen's village. He leveled his sword at the beast. It seemed fiercer than ever, and as it opened its jaws, Jack thought he'd be swallowed whole. He lifted his sword, closed his eyes, and hoped for the best. So at the end there, it seems like a moment that almost resembles when Jack gets eaten by the Kraken at the end of Dead Man's Chest, which I thought was kind of cool. But after this, we go back to everyone else who is waiting outside of the city hall. So Arabella is telling the rest of the Barnacle's crew about the huge serpent that is inside, and all the while they're hearing sounds of things breaking and smashing in the building. And out of nowhere, a loud, blood-curdling scream is heard, and everything then falls silent. Arabella decides to go in, but right after she says this, the doors burst open, and out walks Jack, who is dragging Mr. Reese with him. And Jack is really injured. His stomach is bleeding, and he has gashes and burns all over his face. And Jack tells him the beast disappeared in a cloud of smoke after it was killed. Laura then takes a look at Mr. Reese, who is barely conscious, but he tells her he will be fine. And Jack then walks over to Tumen and gives him the amulet and the 3 gems. Tumen is overjoyed at this and at the notion that he can finally go home. And a bunch of pirate guards then walk over to them, and Laura tells them that Madame Minuit is no longer in charge, but she is interviewing for crew members aboard her ship. So the guards put their weapons away, and everyone then makes their way to the docks back to their ships. And Jack bids farewell to Laura Smith and asks everyone to join him on the Barnacle. But we're going to find out that things are going to be very different from now on. So let's read what happens here. So in the book it says, Tim Hawk stretched his arms and smiled. "Well, this has been fun, lads and lasses, and cats." Tim took a deep breath. "But I have got a family to find. After all, I was on my way to do that when Madame Minuit kidnapped me. Seems like a lost cause, I know, but Arabella thought her mother was dead for all those years, and here she is, alive. Maybe my mum and dad are still alive too somewhere. There's a chance." "Of course, lad," Jack said with an understanding smile. Then he turned to Fitzwilliam and tapped his head as if to indicate Tim's insanity. "There's always hope," Arabella said, slapping Jack upside the back of his head. "Take this." Tumen carefully handed Tim the silver gem. Tim's eyes goggled in amazement. "Family is far more important than gold. I hope this brings you luck in finding them. And you'll always have my thanks for rescuing us from Madame Minuit's paralyzing snakes at the Masquerade Noir," Jack added. "Anytime you need a favor, you just ask for old Jack Sparrow. I give you my word, and that's as good as anything else I can give you," Jack muttered the last part. Tim nodded and grinned. There were worse things than having an adventurous sea captain owe you a favor. He ran off, looking happier than the crew of the Barnacle had seen him since they met. "All right, then. Where were we?" Jack said, looking around. "Oh, yes. Goodbye." He then threw his arm around Arabella's shoulders and started to head for the Barnacle. But Arabella hesitated. "What?" Jack asked, confused. "What's wrong now?" Her lips were quivering. For the first time ever, she looked unsure of herself. "Look, Jack, me and me mum, we sort of have to work. Well, you want to stay with her?" Jack said flatly. Captain Smith looked surprised. Arabella shrugged plaintively. "I want to give her a chance, at least. Do you understand? I've never felt so free as I had with you in the Barnacle. I've never had such adventures, or friends, before. And I feel so bad, especially after you made me your first mate and all. She smiled at Jack for a moment, then squared her shoulders in determination. But I've missed her so much. I don't want to lose her again. I'm going to stay with her and Mr. Reese on the Fleur de la Mort. Forever? Jack asked. For now, Arabella responded. A shadow of emotion flickered over Jack's face. Well, do what you have to do, love, he said softly. Then he shook himself and gave a fierce smile. We're all free to come and go on the Barnacle. That's the point, is it not? We're all free to do as we please. Good luck with that, Belle. Jack noticed Arabella's eyes grow watery. You're crying, lass. Just something in me eye, Arabella said, throwing her arms around Jack's neck. Thank you for everything, Jack, she sobbed. You really are the best mate I've ever had, ever will have. Arabella wiped her eyes and then hugged Fitzwilliam. The normally stiff aristocrat was blinking hard and trying to keep his face composed, but tears were running uncontrollably down his cheeks. Ye gods, Jack muttered. He nudged the boy. Steady on there, Fitzy. I am not crying, Fitzwilliam insisted. Arabella smiled sadly and gave him her kerchief to wipe his face with. It looked like an old cleaning rag, but Fitzwilliam took it with delight, as if it were made of French lace. All right, then, Jack said, taking a deep breath. Arabella went to stand between her mother and Mr. Reese, trying to look brave. Everyone else aboard the Barnacle, now. He made impatient gestures at Tumen and John, and even Constance. Actually, we will not be returning with you either, Tumen said quietly. He spread his hands, showing the amulet. I am going home now, and there is no need for you to travel to the Yucatan just to bring me there. Captain Smith is headed down the Mayan coast to escort a sugar shipment slightly out of its way. Jack rolled his eyes and shook his head. Tumen continued, grinning. Now that I have the amulet to return, my village will take me back, and they will reward me greatly when I tell them the tale of how I got it back in the first place. They'll be singing my story for many generations. We, and I and Constance will be joining him in the good life, John added, giving his sister a scratch under the chin. We had a fantastic time on this voyage, Jack, but adventuring is tres dangerous business. We are retiring early, my sister and I. Very early. We're going to live in Tumen's village and fish for the rest of our days. Eh, mon petit? Constance purred in agreement, no doubt envisioning plentiful fish heads for years to come. She hissed a little at Jack, but only a little. Well, off you go then, Jack said cheerfully, strangely unconcerned that he had just lost most of his crew. He turned to Fitzwilliam. Please tell me that you're not coming with me either. Fitzwilliam tried to hide a smile. I am afraid I have nowhere else to go, Jack. That's Captain, Jack corrected. On you go then, I guess, he added grudgingly. Fitzwilliam stepped aboard, followed by Jack, who took the tie line with him. Jack made himself very busy coiling the lines, but watched as everyone else stepped onto the Fleur de la Mort, each disappearing before he or she boarded the invisible ship. Arabella turned around and waved. Then she took a step into what looked like thin air and vanished. So now Jack is left with only one crew member, and that, of course, to his dismay, is Fitzwilliam. And I'm not going to lie, when I first read this, I got very emotional because I did not see this coming. You know, we've spent 7 books so far with all these characters, so to see most of them all go was definitely bittersweet. But we press on, of course, and we have a short epilogue here that will bring us into our next adventure. So Jack and Fitzy are now alone on the Barnacle, and they are already lamenting the loss of their crew. So let's go back into the book one last time, and I think you will all enjoy what happens next. Well, this is dead boring, Jack finally said, breaking the silence. Who would have ever thought it would be just you and me aboard this vessel? How very ironic, as you were the only member of my not-so-faithful crew I tried to keep off this ship. They lapsed into silence again. Jack drew his cutlass and watched its golden tip glint in the sun. Well, what now? Fitzwilliam asked, after a very long, very awkward silence. He put Arabella's kerchief in his breast pocket and stood up and stretched. For once, Captain Jack Sparrow had no answer. Fitzwilliam moved over to the broadside of the ship and pulled out his pocket watch. He smiled as it glowed warmly in the sun. He was happy to have it back. It was the last connection he had to his long-lost sister. Jack also got up and joined Fitzwilliam, for now, the only source of amusement on the Barnacle. He grabbed the gold watch and turned it over in his hands, trying to see what was so special about it. "You're an overly sentimental fool, Fitzy. What's so special about this highfalutin aristocrat and trinket of yours?" Fitzwilliam's nostrils flared and his eyes flashed with anger. "Give it back!" Suddenly, the perfectly clear blue sky grew dark with roiling clouds. Rolling thunder echoed over the sea. "At ease there, Fitzy. Here, take it," Jack said quickly, clapping the watch back into Fitzwilliam's hand. He looked at the sky, spooked. It didn't seem like a coincidence that the angry aristocrat's temper flared up along with this from-out-of-nowhere storm. They had, after all, encountered a pirate named Captain Torrens who could stir storms with his anger. "That was not me," Fitzwilliam said, pointing out over the sea. "Look." A huge ship emerged from below the waves and came at them quickly. It was covered from stem to stern in human bones. Jack didn't need to see it up close to know whose ship this was. It was famous in nightmares and horror stories across the 7 seas. "The Flying Dutchman," he said, his voice thick with dread. But before Fitzwilliam could ask what that meant, a bolt of lightning flashed. A figure appeared on deck beside them as if it had always been there, just waiting for the right moment to make itself seen. He was huge, and his tentacled face squirmed in the shadows. His voice cracked with evil. "Boy," he growled at Fitzwilliam, "best give me your watch or suffer the consequences at my hands. The hands of the captain of the Flying Dutchman. The hands of Davy Jones." And that is the end of Book 7, City of Gold. And let's talk about the elephant that is now in the room. Davy Jones is here and will be showing up in the next book, which is called The Timekeeper. And this is the first time that Jack meets Davy Jones, so you are not going to want to miss the next episode. And also, yes, get excited because my Davy Jones voice is making a return too, as you just heard. It's not too often anymore that I get to do that on here, so that's always really fun. Anyway, as I said, Book 8 of the Young Jack Sparrow series is called The Timekeeper, and will be the start of the next adventure for Jack and Fitzwilliam. But for now, thank you all so much for listening to this episode. I hope you've been enjoying my coverage of these books so far, as I've had a lot of fun putting these together and trying to get the word out about the series. And it's very overlooked and has become somewhat forgotten over the years. So I hope to bring it to the forefront once again with these episodes. But anyway, thank you for listening, for rating or reviewing if you've been kind enough to do that. And I will see you all in the next episode. Take care. Podcast of the Caribbean is in no way affiliated with Disney. If you want to send me an email or a question, you can send it over to podcastofthecaribbean@gmail.com. You can also follow this podcast on Instagram at Podcast of the Caribbean and over on Twitter/X at PodcastPOTC. I post fun content and trivia over there, so make sure to check those platforms out. But be sure to keep a weather eye on the horizon, and always remember, dead men tell no tales.